whole idea with the show was, let's just go talk to the people that are doing the best right now, and doing the best consistently. One of the things I try and qualify for is, I'm not really interested in talking to people who hit the sales lottery, right? We've all seen it. We've seen people that just sort of walked into this mega deal and through no effort of their own, walked out with massive commission checks. So I wanted to get to the heart of those that are performing at the highest levels and are doing it consistently. So the rule became quota carrying individual contributors, and they're either number one or at least in the top 1% because they work for some gigantic organization, and I'm not going to try and solve who the real number one is. So I'll settle for Dave Weiss, who's number one in his division at ADP.
It's like the smallest division in ADP. I'm the only person selling it. So
right. But let's also put Dave in context here a little bit too, right? ADP is an interesting organization. I once worked there. It was the first real sales job that I ever had. And if you perform at a really high level at ADP, they'll approach you and say, hey, we've got this great idea for you. We've got a program we created for amazing salespeople like you, and we're going to call you an elite quota carrier.
Yeah.
Which basically means, for some silly, frilly things that don't really matter, we're going to triple your number.
Yeah.
And you're going to like that.
We'll give you a plaque and a title, and a 5% buy down on President's Club.
There you go.
It's great. It's really working.
So that was the program David signed up for, and he
I was elected.
You were elected.
I was elected. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But you signed up for it. You said yes. Not that you could say no. So, and then he did 200% of that year. So that's the level. That's kind of the fun, right? So, and then it's just dissecting that. It's getting to the heart of why. What the heck are you doing? How are you doing that? That's the whole thing. So last May, we did the first ever Sales Success Summit because I was like, hey, this is fun. Or some people were there. This is fun. But it's one thing to passively listen to a podcast in your car while you're trying to move heavy things around in the gym. It's another thing to actually be able to spend time together and really learn from each other. So we had an incredible event. I mean, it was really, really something special. And after that event, a few of us, both of you were there, a few of us got together afterwards because I had this idea for a book. I was in, and I tell this story in the introduction. I was getting ready for one of my interviews. I happened to be at a conference in Las Vegas, and I found this guy. His name was Robbie Siegel. Still is, I think. He was, and another, just all the stories are so amazing, right? So Robbie was a VP of sales for like 10 years, killing it as a VP. Found himself just too overextended, wasn't spending enough time with his kids and his family. Territory came up in his own backyard, and he said, I'm going to take that. I don't need to be a VP anymore. I'm not going to do the travel anymore. I'm going to pick up that bag that just came up in my territory. I'll help my backfill, but that's what I'm going to go do. And in 2 years, he was the number one guy out of 150 folks. And so Robbie and I get together in a hotel room in Las Vegas to record this interview, and I'm telling him kind of the backstory of how does the interview start. It's kind of the same story. And I said, because there just aren't books by you. And he said, well, that's because we're too busy selling. We don't have time to write a book. And I thought right then, I'm like, I'm going to solve this, right? If I can spread the work out enough. So I totally cheat. We created a 300-page book. I wrote 7% of it. So I'm like the laziest author you will ever find. Instead, I herded cats.
Well said.
And it was
You did a great job.
It was a lot of fun.
Really good job.
Thank you. So we got together the day after the summit. About 8 of us, I think. They're all named in the book. Look them up. That introduction is pretty good. Part of the 7%. And we just sort of fleshed it out. And it was funny because I went in and I didn't want to. I had some ideas going in. I had a couple of titles rattling around in my head. I had a couple of concepts I thought I'm able to play with. But I thought, I don't want to influence this in any way. Let me just ask a couple of questions and shut up, because I've gotten pretty good at that. Podcasting has its benefits. And I said, look, what's the opportunity for us? We all read a lot of these sales books. So where's the gap? What's missing in all of these books that are being released? And then what's the overarching kind of umbrella and title and everything that we can work from? And it took them like a minute. They're like, Scott, you're an idiot. What's missing is there's no content from us. And people need to hear our stories and these examples of what it's really like in the real world, not 200 pages of somebody preaching their methodology that doesn't actually work. So they're like, and you have a podcast called Sales Success Stories. That seems perfect. Why don't you call the book Sales Success Stories? So we did.
Here we are.
Here we are.
You're a brilliant man.
Just shut up. which is what I'm going to attempt to do now.
Thank you.
What's that?
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm gonna get back to work on this. It looks good. It's quite full. So David, why don't we start with you?
Okay.
Why don't you start and talk about? I always ask questions. I want to know the answers too. I want to hear about your experience of the process, but also what did you learn from it, and what did you get out of the experience of being harassed by me?
So it was fun, for one. I learned so each of the stories I wrote, one of them I wrote on a plane while drinking scotch. Another one I wrote while driving to Austin to visit that guy, drinking.
How do you write in a car?
My wife was driving.
Okay.
Yeah. I can multitask like a champ. I just talked into Siri and she text recorded it. Drinking a beer. And the third one I actually wrote legitimately. And that was my MedPick story, so I think I needed to. It was a little bit more technical, less touchy-feely. So
Story number 53, literally my favorite story it's certainly the audio book, so
thank you.
you have to go in a little ways.
So I guess I can write better when I'm not drinking. That's what you're saying. So that was one. Inspiration comes when I drink. Two, Scott did a phenomenal job keeping everybody on track. That was probably one of the hardest things, is you were corralling 20 of us to hit what anyone would consider a monumental deadline. I mean, we wrote
all of these people.
Yeah, we wrote a book in, was it 3 months, 2 months?
Oh, wrote it? Yeah, probably
2 months.
2.5 months.
I mean, anybody who's written anything, yeah, that's incredible. To get it all together and edited and launched, I mean, monumental effort. Things I learned along the way, I found my voice, which was kind of neat. I talk all day long, like literally that's all I do is just fucking talk to people. 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. But I hadn't ever really found my story voice. And I started by reading a book on writing a book, which was kind of neat. I'm trying to remember what it was called. I think it was called Wired for Story. And Wired for Story talks about, how to write engaging stories and tell things that people want to, read and listen to and all that. So I read that, and I got a few things out of it. But what I realized was I write like I talk. So I just started thinking and typing and trying to make it fun and interesting and something that, I'd want if someone was telling me to listen to. And those are some of the things I learned.
Awesome. Trey, same question.
It's a great question. This was a lot of fun. It was interesting. What I'd share with everybody is the opportunity to speak with a lot of other top achievers. And Scott, although he's very capable with the book, he's also an amazingly high achiever himself in an enterprise sales perspective. I was amazed at how humble everybody was. Everybody thinks if you're making big money, if you're in the top 1%, you're going to be an asshole. It must happen if you're in the top 2 or 3%. Because the people that I've interacted with are humble, they're dedicated, and they're committed, and they like to share a lot with people. And it's interesting, some of these stories that we all talk about over beers, it's harder to share when you're going to evangelize what you've learned. One of my stories was about a failure. And I had a lot of fun sharing that because I want to make sure people didn't make some of the same mistakes. These stories, as short as they are, have also become a voice that I don't have to carry. So I lead, mentor, coach a bunch of people, and a lot of times I'll point them to the book now. There's a story about how do you quickly get to a no? How do you make efficient use of your time and get to a no? And for me, it was a very interesting insight of, man, that's tough to teach sales reps. Why wouldn't you have other sales reps tell those stories? There's process stories and everything, and I've enjoyed reading it, and it inspires you to want to do more, to share more, and be better. And it's been a blast going through the process.
Yeah. And you get to tell your team, go read the book.
Yeah. Or else, right?
Right.
I think there's a couple of like really interesting themes that have come out of the book, the podcast, kind of all of it, right? And I think what was in the podcast, right? And the feedback that I get, my favorite feedback is just the humanizing of this, right? Like, we're all just people, right? Like, we all do the same things, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit more efficiently, maybe with a little bit more caring. I think that's kind of one of the big themes is that the very best seem to care the most about their client, not themselves. And when you do that, the right things come. Now, I do think that there is a little bit of kind of a survivorship bias in the group that we're collecting. There's only been a few instances where people have told me no, they won't come on the podcast. But in those instances, I'm pretty damn certain, and I've gotten feedback after the fact, those are the assholes. So there are still top 1%ers who are just jerks. We've experienced them, right? They're very evident about it. So the beauty is they're not ever willing to share. So they don't come on my show, and so that sort of trickles and filters down. But where I think it really came out was the time we spent together in the summit. There was something about that. And you really got to see and feel how invested everybody was. And the other thing, not just the human caring piece, but the commitment to learning and improving. And I think that's where the humility button got pressed so hard, is everybody walked into that feeling like, wow, I'm surrounded by greatness and a lot of people who are better than me. What do I know? This is my opportunity to learn and continue to improve myself.
I think that's right on. Everybody wanted to give back.
Yeah.
Everybody felt, in a way, blessed that we have achieved some of the things that we have, and we wanted to help other people achieve those things. So I think great group leaders.
Yeah, and I think that came through well in the book. So I'm going to talk about one more thing, 1.5 things. And then I'm going to let you guys ask questions, because I think that's more interesting. What's that? Walt always has a lot of questions. We have a special mic, it's all his own. So first, the next summit, we're already planning on that. That has been so much fun. So I goofed up. So the first one we did in May, I was planning to do another different style of event this coming May, and it didn't work, and I just decided things happen for a reason, and I could use some extra space in my life. I don't need to plan 2 events a year in addition to the podcast and all this other madness. So we're going to let that breathe and just be there. And then I decided let's move the summit to what I think will be its permanent home in mid-October. And there's a couple of things I do intentionally about that. One is the timing, right? So it's the first month of the quarter. Right, it's early in the month, it's Monday and Tuesday, right? I'm a salesperson, like I don't want to screw up my own life very much, let alone others who are at the top of their game. So the timing is really intentional, and it just so happens that Austin and the Chamber of Commerce are cooperating with me really well, because that Monday and Tuesday is going to be after the second weekend of ACL and the week before Formula One. It's a pretty good week to be in town. As long as you book your hotel like a year in advance for those who are coming out of town. So that's what's happening. What's amazing is I've already sold 12 tickets to next year's event, and it's a year away. So that's been a ton of fun. The other thing that I'm working towards is having about a quarter of the audience. We do it at the Alamo Draft House, so that makes it pretty exciting. I'm trying to get a quarter of the audience. I've done 50 interviews now. I will do another 25 between now and the next event. So my hope is about a quarter of that audience are top 1%ers who have been on the show. So that's one piece. If you have an interest in that, let me know. Love to chat with you about it. The book, there's this little thing at the top that we put on there kind of intentionally. It says Volume 1. Because I think that we've now got a really good repeatable model, and this probably becomes sort of an annual thing. So my plan for next year is, as we're finishing the second Tuesday of the month of the summit, we'll sort of combine these two events, right? So that experience with sort of a more public book launch event. So we'll launch it right as part of the event. And thematically, that was a really fascinating part to me. David, you might want to add some color to this, because David was probably the biggest driver. If you don't know, if there's one thing you need to know about David, is he is a process machine. Those of you who are in the front probably noticed that when we were getting up here, he's like, "What's the plan? We're not prepped. What the hell? This isn't how I operate." We spent a lot of time in kind of that mastermind session trying to figure out the book, trying to figure out what are all of the most important things. What is the structure? What do we have to make sure that we touch on? How do we address all of this? And I finally just said, forget it. Like, this isn't going to work. Let's just get the content. We'll figure out how it goes together afterwards. And fortunately, that model worked out really well. And you'll see kind of the 4 major themes and sections in the book. But it was Chris McNeil. So Chris and I have been spending some time together. Well, so I think that mentoring is such a fascinating concept, right? Because it's supposedly I'm mentoring Chris. But as with a lot of mentoring relationships, I think, and you'd agree with this too, Trey, as being in the same boat, I think a lot of times you as the mentor get more out of the process. So I've been doing a lot of like distilling of of these broader themes and what is it that makes the best of the best. Chris got it down to 2 freaking things, and now I'm acknowledging you publicly that I'm absolutely ripping this off for the rest of time. But it comes down to master yourself, master your process. And I'm like, exclamation point? That's it. It really does sort of come together into those 2 things. Now, lots of nuance, lots of areas where both of those things apply. But at the end of the day, I think that's ultimately the way that it all kind of simplifies and comes together. So, commentary on that before we let them have at us, you.
I love that I'm also stealing.
It's a gross oversimplification, but like every one of you guys, I picked this up a couple months ago. You're all such extreme versions of yourselves, and it's that degree of mastery that lets you, right, go out and really excel.
Yeah, I mean, there are things like curiosity, innate curiosity. There are things like wanting to help people and solve problems. There are things like ridiculous persistence. Those, to me, would all fall into, and there's a lot of other things that make great salespeople. Those are some of the ones that, for me, are drivers that come to mind. But those fall into the mastery of self almost.
Yeah.
And then I go to a ridiculous extreme with process-oriented, scientific-based selling, which is what I've talked about in everything that we've done. So your 2 examples really, that gives a lot of clarity.
Well, part of you adopting process so much is part of you mastering yourself, right? Trey might not be as married to process as you, I don't know, right? Because that's not him, but that's you. And you got comfortable with that, and then you just ran it.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I would almost say what you're saying is a blend of art and science. So the process aspect is, to me, is the science, where the personality, master self, is the art.
Yeah.
And it's that. I like how you say it better, but it's that. Yeah.
And on that note, I was talking to Chris and Scott before we had dinner, and I've been asked to go out and hire some sales reps for a fast-growing division of our company. And I asked the guys, I said, all right, am I hiring athletes or am I hiring experts? People that have done the business for a long time, or athletes that are hungry and want to do it now? And man, it wasn't even a quiet answer. It was a resounding, you gotta hire athletes. You gotta hire people that are hungry, that want it, that want to build something truly great. You can teach process, and you're obviously very, very good at that, right? coaching
Try and
people in
teach
process.
process. Will someone follow the process?
But it's an interesting thing. Throughout this process, we have been in a number of meetings. We had the enterprise sales networking group that we met with. And everybody kept asking us questions like, well, how do you use LinkedIn? How do you hit the easy button? How do I get access to 10,000 clients that want to buy my product? And what it kept coming back to is there is no easy button. You got to start out every morning. You got to work harder than everybody else. You got to sweat more in practice so you bleed less in battle. All these great analogies that came down to hungry athletes that believed that they could be the best. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved hearing stories about how different people got there. And trust me, there were very, very different processes on how they got there, but there were themes of just a regimented focus and an ability to set goals higher than what your quota was. You never heard in the last year that we've all been together anybody talk about their quota. It was 200% of their quota, 250% of their quota, and everything they did day in and day out was leading up to those higher goals. So it's been fun. I mean, it's really been fun to see how other people got there and just the pride and the humble approach in which they used to share those stories.
Walt, you want to kick us off? Oh,
I was going to say, you remember your ADP. It's always your club number.
yeah.
It's never your quota.
Right.
It's
How
always
many
your club
times you been?
number. How many times you've been, it's always the club number. Club numbers, depending on where you are in the organization, 115 to 125% of your number. But no one ever mentions quota. It's what's your club number, how close are you to the club? Every conversation. So it's the same
It's
idea.
great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Who edited the book? Did y'all edit each other's stories?
No. So
I like that.
editing sucks. Man, talk
It's like
about
legal red lines.
Yeah. Talk about the hard part of the book. So there were 2 rounds of paid professional editors and then just some other kind of proofreader kind of stuff. There are 80,000 words in the book. There are problems in that book. You're going to find them. Please tell me.
My wife found me.
We'll fix them in the next rev. It is a maddening process, but at some point, you just got to ship the damn thing. So, I'm not a real publisher. I'm not willing to spend 12 to 18 months to get it perfect.
For salespeople, it was good enough.
Exactly.
So it sounds like you guys both read the book as well.
I'm sorry?
Dave and Trey, you guys read the book, and then you read it. I noticed that everyone has more than one story in
Yep.
there. It seems like so.
3.
Maybe you guys could share because we all met each other at the summit too. Like maybe share a story or chapter or whatever that leaked out to you. Like they never told me about that, or what that was gold.
So
I'm not
mine
claiming
was,
to have read other people's stories. I just
Yeah.
wrote mine.
Scott and I get together once a month, and it's always great to ask people that are your peers that can give you ideas, just like the athletes versus experts conversation. I don't care where you go, you talk to some people that you respect even in a short amount of time, and they're so passionate about our athletes, it brings wisdom. And Scott and I were together, and he said, you need to go and read the chapter about how you get to a no. Because in the new company I've gone to work at in the last 5 months, it's an old world business. It's facilities management. It's a high growth business with everything we're seeing right now with vanishing trades and everything. I've learned to tell the story clearly. But what I haven't figured out yet is how to get to a no. The people that are leading me down a path, the people that want to know how to get their easy button without being a willingness to spend money. And you're looking at 1,200 words. Man, it was great. It was great guidance from Scott. Go read this chapter, learn how to get to a no, get there quickly. And it wasn't like that hasn't been preached to me about once a year for my entire career, but it's a good reminder. Don't waste your time on somebody that's really just enjoying hanging out and maybe getting a free lunch every once in a while. Get to the people that have legitimate pain and that want you to help them solve their problem. So that was the one that kind of resonated with me.
Yeah. So, and that story title's a little bit different. So Yella Dendunen wrote that one, and it's story 52. It's called Deal Qualification: How I Used to Lose 40% of my deals to a single competitor, and the single competitor was no decision. Right. So it's all about kind of that qualifying on the front end. I am way too intimately familiar with all of this going back to your editing question, I think that it's the beauty of what this is you're going to come to different things and need different advice at different pieces at different times. I think like top of the funnel, because a lot of people are prospecting never gets old as a topic. Florin Tatulia, who was at the time the top sales development rep at Lupio, is now one of their AEs. He's got 2 or 3 stories in here that are, I don't remember what the third one is, so that one must not matter. But I think we all probably have that. I probably have 1 or 2 of those. But he talked. One is just how to stand out and be an above average sales development rep, and he talks about all of the pieces. And he opens it suggesting that the difference between the top 10% and the other 90% is little minute things, and the difference between the top 10% and the top 1% is again little minute things. So what are those? What are those likely to be? And so he kind of walks through different pieces, and then he's got just a great companion to that where Florin is also extraordinarily analytical. He A/B tests the snot out of everything, and so his sort of measured approach to getting there. But to Chris's point, right? This theme of extreme versions of ourselves, like that's it. I mean, that really is when you boil it all down, because I can't run the Florin A/B testing play, not in my DNA, right? David probably could, right? So it's again sort of pulling out those things that resonate with you. So I think everybody's going to find different stories, and that's what I want here, right? Get back to us, share on LinkedIn, tag that person that wrote that story that really resonated and connected with you, because those are the things that I want to understand. What's more broadly connecting with other people? At this point, I'm way the heck too close to this thing.
One of the things when we were going through our initial strategy session on writing the book itself, we whiteboarded all it grew to a list of almost 30 themes, but it was probably about
Easily. I picture somewhere.
Yeah, it got to a point where it was almost every piece of a sales journey, if you will, from picking a career in sales to early stumbling blocks to process to negotiation to, I mean, it was in depth. So one thing I'll say is if you're running into anything, any challenge, there's probably a story there that addresses it from a top performer that's dealt with it and figured out and synthesized probably one of the better ways to handle it. So there's a lot of good stuff.
Talk about, you guys keep making eyes at each other. I know you've got a project in the works.
I just like making eyes at Eddie.
Because one of the sections I'm most proud of is the sales career section, right? I feel like that's an area that's just, it's not addressed. Like this is a freaking hard job to be in from so many different pieces. And one of the stories I share, and it scared the crap out of me to share it, was the time I got fired from Bazaar Voice, right? And what sort of happened behind that, and what I needed to own, and what the other circumstances were. But it's one of those things when you look at any situation, like any job in the world today has risk and has challenges. Sales is so magnified, right? There's so many things beyond just that job that you don't control. You don't control what your quota is going to be and how your territory is going to change and how your manager might change, because we've dealt that one before. There's all of those different things. So I'm really excited that we really started to dig into that, and I think you guys are maybe working on digging into that a little bit deeper.
So I met that guy in college.
And Andy introduced, so wait, this is a fun story.
Yeah.
Andy starts listening to the podcast, reaches out to me, is sitting in my seat at ADP running across my name in Salesforce from umpteen years ago. And then we connect, get to know each other, and he's like, you got it. And this is early days of the podcast, so I'm still like, how the heck do I find these people? I need to find these top 1%ers. Where does that come from? He's like, you got to talk to David. So Andy introduced me to David. Is how this all started.
So I met that guy in college. He was in a fraternity right down the street from my fraternity. And we started drinking and hanging out. There's a lot of themes in my life that revolve around drinking. It's my muse. I mean, it really is. So nonetheless, so Andy and I met in college.
Mentioned in the book.
It's mentioned, and we've stayed friends for better part of 10, almost 15 years now. He was looking at getting into sales. I would say probably early on. I was one of his early mentors. We've stayed close, of course, and Andy introduced me to Scott. And fast forward to today, we're writing a book about early sales career, and I'm not going to talk any more about it because it was Andy's idea, and he kind of tagged me into the book. But if you want to mention, what we're doing.
Yeah. So just a little more context. My entire sales careers have been talent recruitment, actually agency recruitment, sometimes recruiting salespeople for companies. So I spent a lot of time talking about careers, talking about jobs, talking about talent acquisition, and also considering the human element of it because, like, fundamentally, I'm kind of a helper. I want to help people with their lives and et cetera. So that's why I'm driven in sales. And I find myself answering a lot of questions from junior salespeople about, like, what is sales? Like, is this a good thing? Do I do this? Is this for me? Like, I'm not a people person, but I like to solve problems. And I found that, like, I find myself answering this question a lot, but there wasn't any resource out there for that, right? There's a million books, to Scott's point, about how to sell, right? We can all learn how to sell from books, from podcasts, from our salespeople, our sales leaders, but there wasn't a, is sales for me, or how the heck do I manage a sales career? Because, yeah, you like a job, you like a market, your manager leaves, you have a new manager, you don't get along with them. How do you manage that situation, right? Or work demands 12 hours from you a day. How do you manage your personal situation with your partner? Like, I had a big passion around this, and I know that David's managed and solved a lot of these challenges himself, so that's it in a nutshell.
I think I've worked with, led, spent a lot of time with salespeople in my life. And I wanted to make sure that the next generation of sellers were maybe better than some of the current generation of sellers. Not saying anything bad about the current generation of sellers.
I think you're really connecting with the audience.
But I thought it was important that, the world is changing. It's changing every day. And how you sold yesterday is different than how you sell today. And there's a lot of stories about it. But I really wanted to give back and essentially help people that were thinking about this being their future life. I talked about this in the podcast. If you're going to dedicate your life to something, make sure you're dedicating it to the right thing, and that you're gonna play to your strengths and be successful, and teed up naturally to be successful. So a lot of that book is about, what are your strengths, and should you go into sales? What are the myths about sales? And what part of sales make the most sense necessarily for you based on your strengths and what you're good at. So great idea, Andy. It was I think a gap in the marketplace. I'm excited to be part of it.
4 months to go. Get it done.
Yeah. I'm the holdup right now, so I'll take the ownership on that one.
Go ahead.
So we've all kind of touched on it and been exposed to it with these sales professionals. What is the, so many things in sales are changing all the time. What we're selling, instead of here, we're talking about selling software versus selling tangible goods, how we're selling, how people are buying. We're not selling big, large one-ticket items anymore. We're selling monthly subscriptions and annual revenue or annual recurring revenue. And so I guess I'd just like to hear your guys' comments. You were talking about athletes versus experts, but how do you see the contemporary salesperson, or what does that look like? And how have you seen salespeople evolve over the last 5 years, and where do you see them in the next 5 years?
So it's interesting. At Accruent, this is a company that's been around since 1995, and I'm facing that real time because you have a lot of salespeople that still want to do the old traditional 24-month sales cycle. Let's do a webinar. Let's write a white paper. And the way people consume information has changed wildly. People want podcasts. They want to know in 5 or 10 minutes. But what hasn't changed is why people buy. You can count on, if you can't save people 6 to 10x of what they're spending, they aren't going to invest with you. They just aren't, unless it's a compliance issue, right? If you can't generate 6 to 10x more revenue than what they could do than what they're doing today, they're not going to change. Those are the things that haven't changed. How people consume and how people relate to you is where I think reps need to be nimble. And I think a lot of young, eager, hungry reps are just better at taking data, processing it down, turning it into a podcast, right? I'm ecstatic about the book because I read. A lot of the reps that I talk to don't read magazines, right? If it's not on ESPN or an Alexa briefing, they have no idea what's going on in the world. And you have to think about your clients and figure out how you get to that type of information. I think you can be highly successful connecting with them and relating to them and honoring if they let you into their network via LinkedIn. But honestly, don't have any illusions. If you can't show the value, I don't think they're going to buy anything.
So, well, I'll tell you, I think it's a very big question. And if I'm going to unpack it in a few different ways, I'd say the buyer's journey is different than it ever has been. From a consensus selling standpoint, you have more buyers within every sale, and they are more informed than ever. Like, they know your product probably as well as an entry-level salesperson does by the time they reach out and engage you. So where I think sales is evolving is it's less people that are pitching a product and more people who are true business acumen experts. Why I differentiate myself from among my clients is I know their business as well as they do. I know my solution, I know my competitor's solution, I know the deltas and the gaps between all of those solutions. I know the impacts my solution can have on their business, and I'm truly digging really deep into the business case for them making a change. So it's so much business acumen than it is ability to pitch. I'd say a lot of sales in the history before data was, I could find out anything in the world about this thing in my pocket. It was about salespeople just being able to pitch and tell stories and be interesting, and no one really could compare what they were saying because it was just another salesperson that would come in behind them and tell that same story. That to me has fundamentally changed. So I say the salespeople of the future, in my mind, need to be much more business savvy and have much better business acumen, and like to me it goes a lot back to those things. The other side that I would unpack is around prospecting. Our prospects, we can find them so easy. They almost are removing themselves from being able to be found by taking themselves off LinkedIn or doing other things like that. I see that more than I thought I would. And they have gatekeepers and ways to see who's calling them. So phone calls, that could be really good at times, but the higher you go, I find maybe not as much. So it's almost reverting back to, in a way, the ways we've almost more traditionally gained access, which is not mass emails, mass phone calls. It's getting much more personal, and it's also social connections. I would say that is one of the major shifts from a processing standpoint in the next generation, is really getting back to like one of my best successes, and we talked about this, college sweatshirts, college mugs, actually learning where people went to school, what they care about, and reaching out to them with that, or saying, hey, I know Scott, and you know Scott. Scott, do you mind introducing me, or hey, can you at least say that David's not a total dickhead? So
I'll put that in writing.
that's good. I'll have you sign it. So, like,
Wrote in your book.
that's fantastic. Thank you. So if you're talking about the changes in culture and next generation, those are some two main areas I'm seeing big time change.
So tomorrow I'm getting published to hire my first ever salesperson for my small business. A little terrified. Yeah. I'm a founder and I'm graduating. So I'm moving more into CEO role and handing off sales. And
Best of luck to you.
yeah, and it's probably the most expensive person I'm ever gonna hire is a great salesperson, and I want to compensate them really well. So in the book, are there particular stories that you point me to get some knowledge that I can cram on tonight before I hit post tomorrow morning?
For yourself.
Process. Sorry, go ahead.
MedPay.
MedPay.
That's it. That's it.
MedPay.
MedPay.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
That's
It's okay.
chapter story
There's
53.
a story about it.
Yeah.
Figured out in 1,200 words or less.
I think the leadership challenge is different, and it's funny. Chris moved. Chris emailed me this morning because I released the foreword on the podcast because he'd skipped over that and didn't read it. It was like, oh my God, that was the foreword of the book is sort of beyond epic, and Lee looks at it from both sides, right? So I intentionally built this book for the individual contributor, but Lee talks a little bit about the challenge of being a leader and how do you deal with and grow a great sales professional. Ultimately what it comes down to, and I think this is the challenge of sales leadership, right? Sales leadership is not a one-size-fits-all thing, right? If you look at what that overarching theme is and the best version of yourself, it's really understanding what are the innate strengths of this person and the way that they work and how do we maximize that versus trying to put them in this process box that we have. So I think your challenge, your opportunity is to just get to know this person, let them devise their own process in the way that they want to do things. I feel like you guys, I'll let you pile onto this, but I feel like any above average salesperson is going to already have an approach and an innate intelligence about how they're going to operate in their sales function. The function of a great leader is not to redirect them or box them in. Their function is to polish the diamond, right? Help them and mostly ask them questions. Just continue to challenge the way that they're thinking and the process that they're doing to help them get to the next level and find that next level in themselves that's going to create the results that you want. And then everybody's going to win. They're going to love working for you. You're going to be the type of leader that they're going to enjoy, because what we all want, we want to grow. We want to be better, right?
Yes. So I'm definitely going to pile on that. Anybody in the room familiar with Marcus Buckingham's work? Yes. Okay. So
We drop a title or two because I know the name, but I'm not
okay.
connecting.
So Marcus Buckingham wrote a book called First Break All the Rules. Okay. His entire life has been studying how the best leaders lead. And he is well known in the HR marketplace as being the king of employee engagement and helping to get leaders to become better leaders. What Marcus Buckingham says is there is a little bit of a silver bullet, and it's a couple major things. One, understand the people's you're working with strengths and play to those strengths every single day. Don't care about their weaknesses. Someone will grow in their weaknesses about this much. Someone will grow in their strengths like this. I think we can all know that in our lives. We've had things that we were decent at or good at, and we've focused on them and we became amazing at them. Things that, like, I will never be able to dance. You could fucking give me all the lessons in the world. Or sing, musical instruments, coordination, all that. No. So first, figure out the person's strengths and give them as many opportunities as possible to play to those strengths. The next, a leader's responsibility is to ask their people 2 questions every single week. What are your priorities this week? Not this month, not this year, not this quarter, this week. The year is broken up into 52 sprints. So what are your priorities this week? How can I help you achieve them? The leader does those 2 things. You will likely be more successful and achieve your goals. So that's not me saying it. I'm not special. That's Marcus Buckingham, but I'm a big fan of his work, and I lead that way, and my team sees amazing results because of it. So I think that hopefully answers your question. Kind of falls in a lot of line.
We still haven't told you another story in the book beyond the forward. Trey, anything else? You want to add?
Oh, and then process. Make sure they do the process. MedPay.
I mean, there's some great stories in the book, and maybe Scott can point you to one. What I hoped you just heard the whole crew up here say is, you have to lead. I read an article that says one of the worst things a startup can do is go and hire a sales leader, because that's a VP that wants to put process in place. You got to be that person in the beginning. You got to have the passion, the commitment, and you have to take that passion and figure out how to package it up so that that salesperson can go and sell it. And that's big. I mean, you can't hit the easy button with just a salesperson. They have to get religion surrounding your passion for your book, your product, whatever you're taking to market. There will be a time that you go and hire, David. You go and hire the right people to grow that team. But in the beginning, I think you need to figure out where the value is, why people want to buy your product, what they want to pay for it, and how that's either going to save them money or make them money. And if you're an evangelist, that sales rep can set up a lot of meetings and can close deals. And over a short period of time, they'll become the evangelist. And your biggest challenge will be, how do you make it repeatable? Now I got one. How do I make two? How do I make three? How do I get a sales leader? How do I get a bigger available market to go sell to? But right now, you got to bring that level of passion. And no matter how good they are, you have to teach them how to love your product and believe in it so that they can go sell it. You may have a chapter you're thinking about.
No, I think we're done. So thank you all for coming. Really. What's this, Scott? Please stop talking. No, seriously, I really appreciate you being here. Enjoy the book. The most valuable thing that you can do for us is share it and write a review. We'd love to hear what you think and really what connects and what resonates and what drives and inspires you. Thanks for coming.